I'm here today with Warren Crank of the Red Dirt Church. So, Warren, it's fantastic to have you here today. Thanks so much for coming and giving us a bit of your time and your wisdom and insights. But first of all, tell us about Red Dirt Church. What the heck is it?
Basically, it's designed to be a little network of simple churches, micro churches, you might call them. That the dream, I guess, is that they're linked across the country. But I guess the vision really is to give people the opportunity, particularly in rural and remote places where the traditional church might not be affordable or realistic, to give those communities or some subcultures where it won't work quite like the normal church does, the opportunity to actually have vibrant faith communities sort of established in there. So that's what Red Dirt Church is. It's something intended to be very simple that allows people to bring together a faith community, which hopefully has an outward-looking posture. And so that's basically it.
That's great. So you use the term pop-up churches. Tell us what you mean by a pop-up church.
Well, we're using pop-up because I'm learning off an Indigenous church that Ellie and I are part of, the community up here in Brisbane. And they actually are stewarding a property 3.5 hours from here, doing a rejuvenation project there. So they might pop up there on the weekend or down at the beach, next weekend, or in someone's house the week after. And Ellie and I really experienced the freedom and sort of the joy of the variety, I think, of having to have church pop up here and pop up there. So we've sort of used this idea to help people also see how simple it can be. It doesn't take a lot to do, and you don't need a lot of infrastructure or anything like that. And it can sort of simply pop up here and there. So the word itself is trying to convey a message, really, that it's possible, it's simple, and it can happen anyway.
Yeah, so really, when you're talking about pop-up churches, it's not that the churches are temporary, it's just that the location is temporary. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Although anyone who works in this sort of zone realizes that some little churches do start up and they don't sort of stick around very long. So it's a bit experimental. But no, we are talking about the ease of facilitating one, and also the fact that, it's not sort of in one location. In some ways, it's also demonstrating its difference to the established traditional church, which generally is bricks and mortar oriented and built around a facility, which is not bad. That's just how it is. So we're sort of painting a picture that this is something different to that.
Yeah. So for yourself, you've had the experience with the bricks and mortar church. You've led a couple of large churches yourself.
And loved
Tell
it.
us about the journey into the smaller pop-up churches. How's that been for you? I guess what I'm getting at is, what are the big differences that you see, and would you go back?
Well, I would go back if I felt clearly called to do that. But I think my experience was when you're in a senior role in a church or on any leadership team, what you quickly realize is the massive amount of hours that get caught up in keeping the thing going, essentially.
Yeah.
So there was some sense of personal dissatisfaction in that. I thought, is this really how I want to spend my days? Meeting after meeting after meeting, trying to put out fires, worrying about whether the people who are on this little team are going to be happy or not. I sort of got a bit dissatisfied with that, not because I didn't love the people anymore, but I thought this is not really productive work from my point of view. So it started with that sort of impulse that I want to be spending my time differently to this. The second thing was Bill Hybels, this is going back 5-10 years or something. He was beginning to say that small groups, which Willow Creek had championed for so long, were observably on the slide right around the Western world. So people seem to still be, mostly turning up to the Sunday service, but it was becoming harder and harder to get people to come out to some midweek small gathering. And yet we all knew that it's in those smaller contexts that the gritty discipleship best takes place. So I sort of thought to myself, well, if I had to choose between, standing up in front of people, putting on a service and delivering a sermon, and, facilitating networks of small discipleship oriented little faith groups, well, the choice for me was pretty easy. So it was dissatisfaction personally with how I felt I wanted to live out my life and calling. And secondly, the observable data around small groups. And even though church services are wonderful, they are quite limited in their ability to really ground out the gospel in the lives of people. So I thought if I had to choose, well, I'd choose the small way. And that's the way I've been on for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. I know just one of my personal reflections was that quite some years ago, when Steve Addison came out with the book "What Jesus Started,"
Yeah, I
and
read that. Good book.
yeah, it was a great book. But and I had Steve over at our church, the church I've been involved in leading, and he was training us in those things, and I had I guess the penny drop that so many church leaders are involved in leading but not actually making disciples. And it sounds funny because I've probably been pastoring a church for 15 or 18 years of that time. But I know for myself at the time, it felt like the first time probably I was actually involved in making disciples and discipling people rather than just leading. And it was a huge, huge paradigm shift for me, and one that I'll never want to go back on.
So good. Yeah, I was in a senior leadership role in a denomination up in Queensland. I love the denomination and they've been wonderful to me. But what I observed in the ordination process, in the interviewing process, was that most of the people coming to do priority number one was to preach. And while I see that's valuable and important, it did worry me a little bit that it wasn't really about the mission or mobilizing people so much as the event of delivering a sermon for a lot of those people. And I'm not being unkind or unfair, but it's just that observation that also disturbed me, because I thought, I wonder if this is where it's going. Those people who feel trained and called to ministry are thinking that it's all about preaching, whereas it's disciple making ultimately.
Yeah, no, that's good. So we're talking here about, I guess, some of your underlying values that you have discovered. Tell us about the values of the Red Dirt Church.
Well, we came up with 4. I don't know why, but we did. And the first one is that everything is personal. So the tagline is, we meet up and we share life.
Yeah.
And for small groups to be successful in the discipleship process, there needs to be that meeting up. And so there still is a commitment to gather, but it's actually to share life, not to listen to something or whatever. So that's really important. So we try and make everything personable with Red Dirt. And obviously, if you're in a small setting, that's actually easier to do. So that's sort of the first one. The second one is biblical, that we want to be meditating on God's word daily and learning to imitate Jesus. And so the Bible needs to have a very important place in the life of a Red Dirt church. I've actually created an app called Red Dirt Spirit. And this app essentially scaffolds Bible reading for each day, as well as relevant meditations and prayers, just short and sweet. But the idea is to help people get into that daily habit of reading the Bible. One of the things that we found with Red Dirt Church, particularly as it reaches people who are often right outside the church, is that there's no rhythm or habit that has been developed, and it's hard to get one going. Even the idea of praying for someone who has not done it much in their life or done it at all, what words do I use? And a lot of the people that I work with aren't really wordy sort of people. So we scaffold them with prayers that they can pray as well. So biblical, we meditate on God's word daily, learn to imitate Christ. Then it's transformational. And the tagline for that one is, we make a change for good while being changed by God. In other words, we don't wait for God to somehow finish us and we're now a masterpiece and we're ready to roll. We recognize that we're all broken and that we need to move in the world that we're in, with whatever that is, with this idea of what changes can we make for good here, even as God is doing that inner work in our own lives as well. And the final one is that we're on mission with God, or it's missional. We're on mission with God as unofficial chaplains. So the tagline recognizes that actually God is on mission. We join him on the mission, but the posture we have, we may or may not talk about that later, is to be sort of an unofficial chaplain to the people around us. So they are the 4 values: personal, biblical, transformational, and missional.
Fantastic. And the values, where you can see it's not just the values that so many churches have, which describe a nice, comfy environment, the values which will really be integrated into the behaviours that you actually see in your church. I like that. I love it. So
Yeah.
tell us about your vision. What's the vision for Red Dirt Church?
Well, basically, as the more I network with awesome people like Exponential and micro churches, a lot of people are really pushing in this direction of small, simple churches. I'm not all about that. I actually believe that it takes all sorts of churches to reach all sorts of
Yep.
people. So
Yep.
I don't believe that this is like the be all and end all, but there is a lot of energy and effort going into this area. For us, we really want to try and be an Aussie church and to think about what is it that could make a church uniquely Australian. That's one of the reasons why we've chosen Red Dirt Church. And on the app, we often use Aussie images or quotes from perhaps Indigenous people or Australian
Yep.
theologians. So we try to do that. So we want to work out, well, what would an Aussie church look like? Realizing that, Aussies come from all over the world as well. So it's a generous sort of movement, but we really want to figure out that as best we can anyway. And the idea and the dream, I suppose, is to have really a network right across the country of churches that embrace these values that we've just described, who believe in the mission and can just be there to cheer one another on and help each other out. So
Yeah.
that's sort of the vision.
That's great. So tell us your vision of actually having churches all across Australia. How will you connect with them? Will it be something where you set the Red Dirt churches up and let them go, or that you keep in touch using technology, so on a weekly basis or a monthly basis? Do you have any blueprint in mind for that?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, we are using Zoom, and Tuesday nights is our Zoom prayer night. So people get on from all over the place, from Port Augusta to Pialba in Queensland here, and we Zoom prayer together and just catch up to see how each other is going.
Is that just for leaders or anyone in any?
Just for leaders. So
yes, okay, yep.
we may talk about this later, but all the Red Dirt leaders are volunteers. So we're really careful about what we're asking of them in terms of time and commitment. So it's sort of a peer coaching time as well at those Zoom meetings. I'm doing this full time for nothing. My wife earns our living, and this is sort of the calling that I'm pushing into. And essentially, the idea is that I connect with people. Like this weekend, I've just been down to somewhere. We've just started a little Red Dirt church in a small village in the Gold Coast hinterland. I've met with those people just to encourage them. So I get out and about and do that sort of thing. But we've got a regional approach. So we've got a cluster of Red Dirt churches around the Wide Bay area in Queensland. And we've got a regional advocate, we call that person, who sort of oversees that little cluster of churches, just keeps an eye on things and, again, cheers each other on. We use the word advocate rather than leader because we want each Red Dirt church to be able to find its own rhythm and life really in relation to the community that's in. So there's no template where we jam everyone into doing something. So this advocacy role is trying to cheer people on as they work out, what does a contextualized faith community look like here? And so we want to help people do that. So it's a regional approach as time goes on, using technology, but also people who are located in certain parts of the world.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So, how do you bring about missiology in terms of a church? How do you see the churches, the Red Dirt churches, being mobilized and the people in the churches being mobilized to pursue the mission of Christ?
Well, I really sat with the Mark McCrindle data. We've got two big slabs of it in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And I took it actually very, very seriously. And I came to the conclusion personally that a lot of our evangelism models are American oriented. You and I spoke privately before this of Alpha, which is awesome, out of the UK, much closer to us culturally, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I began to think about, well, what is the key to the Aussie heart, and how might we mobilize lots and lots of people to do that? So I wrote a little book called Unofficial Chaplain. I just got a copy here. It's written for men. It's not a very big book. A few pictures in there. But the idea is that it's basically the collected wisdom of school chaplains, military chaplains, sports chaplains, which I am one of,
Yep.
collating it together in 8 sort of principles of how a chaplain postures themselves inside a secular context, if I can use that word, in order to represent the kingdom of God and the gospel of Jesus.
Fantastic.
So that little book is really widespread across all the Red Dirt churches, and it frames up our missional methodology. It's reasonably easy to understand and to remember and hopefully to do.
That's
So,
good. How can we get hold of that book?
so that book's available as an ebook through Kurong, all those sorts of things. So
Yeah. What about hard copies? Oh, no, paper
yep.
copy. Is it
Yeah,
available
paper
as well?
copy through Kurong.
Yeah. Okay.
They have them all the time. They just stocked another 50, I know, in Queensland. So it's actually a book that's selling,
That's great.
and people are getting on board with it. So
I'm definitely going to get a copy.
yeah, and so they're cheap and easy, cost about $8 or $9 each to actually give to everyone, and so it becomes a handbook
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
everyday service to the people around them. So I know people who are mechanics, all sorts of things. They got them on their desk at work, just to remind them of yeah, I want to be an excellent mechanic,
That's
but
great.
there's also another part to my calling.
I don't know if you've heard in America of Ralph Moore,
I
who
may have
developed.
actually, yes.
He developed a network of, in many cases, are micro churches, but some grew to 2,000 or so in size, and some stayed meeting in a surf club or a house or whatever. And he came out of a Jesus generation, but he started writing books a bit like yourself, which are practical, hands-on how-tos, which he
Yeah.
actually gave his group leaders. Now,
Yeah.
at last I heard, there were 2,800 churches in his network.
Yeah.
It totally surprised him when people went and did an analysis. He thought it might have been a few hundred, I understand, but then they found how many had happened. But he started using books, a bit like what you've described with the unofficial chaplain, which are written as personal, really good books. So, in fact, I got some of those, I don't know, it was probably nearly 20 years ago, and started reading them, and they were part of a guide for myself as well.
Yeah, well, the little book's got a lot of Aussie people quoted, and it's designed to be something that Australians can generally identify with. So
Yeah.
it's also
So,
like key evangelism and very relational. And I
yeah.
think most people don't think, well, I'm not really a public speaker, and I'm not a red hot sort of apologetics person. So it's about a lifestyle of loving and reaching
Yeah.
people.
So just give us one point about this. What have you learned about reaching people from being the chaplain of a rugby league club?
Well, rugby league people are very working class and generally speaking, and very down to earth, no nonsense people. So if you come in like some sort of God pilot or whatever, that's never going to work. So
Yep.
it's basically about creating a situation where first base people think actually you're a decent human being and we're glad you're around. And I often say to people that I teach the unofficial chaplain stuff to, or people in the Red Dirt Network, I often say, really, for Australians, they want to see you living the things that you're talking about. That's all the Mark McCrindle stuff. So rather than, banging
Yeah.
on about anything, very first important thing is to live as best you can a life of integrity in representing Jesus. And what we find is that the conversations come because many of the important questions of life, most people are wanting to ask, they just don't know who to ask. And
Yeah.
McCrindle's research said that Australians aren't impressed by celebrities or anything like that. It's down to earth people who are authentically engaged in living the faith. And
Yeah, no, that's great. And the church that I'm involved in leading, one of the key statements which comes out of a mission statement is actually about helping people figure it out.
good.
Because
How good's that?
Yeah, it's as simple as that, isn't it? How do you figure out how our life and faith and how the two gel together?
Yeah.
So tell us about someone. Tell us about what kind of people do and can lead a pop-up church.
Well, we've got doctors, earth movers, chaplains, a whole variety of people who do it. So it's a wide spectrum, but they're usually people who have a natural network and want to reach that network of people in ways that are authentic to the rhythms of the place they live in, or the language or culture of the people that they hang out with. So a wide variety of people, and they all have a different expression of the church. They all look a little bit different, which is very important to Red Dirt Church, actually. We're not command and control by any stretch. We really want to see the flourishing of different sorts of faith communities.
Yeah.
Some of them are trained, some of them have no training at all, but just have a little bit of lived experience as a follower of Jesus. So there's just a little bit of maturity that they demonstrably have. And other than that, it's a case of let's just make a start and get going. So a wide variety of people, sometimes led by women, sometimes by men, sometimes by a couple.
Yep.
But it's really a case of those people who've got the network, the passion, and understand that unofficial chaplain stuff. We'll give them a jersey.
That's great. So can anyone lead a Red Dirt Church, or there are some minimum requirements that you actually insist upon?
No, definitely minimum requirements, because you know, the Christian church has enough trouble dealing with bad publicity of people who sort of you know, put the faith in disrepute, really. So what we do, we worked out that we wanted ideally a farmer or a pharmacist or maybe a footy club to be able to host a Red Dirt Church, knowing that they're earning their living full-time some other way. So we have to be careful about not adding on hoops after hoops after hoops for people to jump through. So we decided that there were just a few main things that were really important. The first one was that they are part of our child safe training, and that they're accredited as people who are safe to work with children and vulnerable people. The second one was that they have, they can ascribe to a very basic Christian faith statement, but they have a commitment to core and shared gospel beliefs across a wide spectrum. We actually have Reformed type people and Pentecostal type people leading, so it's quite a ragtag group. But we all agree to a basic faith statement and the values that I've just talked about, that we bundle those together in a way. And then after they've done all that, we just do a couple of referee checks just to make sure that there are other people in their world who believe that, yeah, they're made for this sort of thing and they're suitable for this kind of work. And then the rest is just training on the job.
Yeah, that's cool. I'll be interviewing in a few weeks' time Gary Hourigan from INC. One of the things he talks about is that a person who is a candidate for ministry is both suitable and eligible. And he'll be unpacking that, but that's basically what you're talking about then as well. So in essence, instead of just saying, here, off you go, you have your own, can I use almost credentialing format. Do you call it credentialing as such, or?
No, we just call it an application process.
Application process,
We've got a 6-step application process, which involves a little bit of getting to know the person, what their vision is, what God's put on their heart, explaining what Red Dirt is to see if it's the right match for them. There's documents we share along the way, and then they begin the blue card application. That's the Queensland Child Safe Credential. It's different other places, but they begin that process. They do some training. So we've partnered with Child Safe Australia, and we all do the same training. And we've agreed with our insurer that that also once a term we'll do some sort of refresher in child safe. So it's not one and done, but we're keeping that in the forefront of people's minds.
So you do have ongoing training that you're actually requiring as well.
And that training might simply be read these 4 pages of the Child Safe Handbook and answer these 3 questions. It might be that, or watch this video and just let us know that you've watched it and understood its content.
So just on the whole child safe area, do you as Red Dirt Church have an overarching child working with children and vulnerable people policy, or does every individual church?
So that's one of the documents we give people.
And so then they adopted it as a small church, or is it?
That's right. So now most of the Red Dirt churches are quite small, 6, 12. One of them's a bit bigger than that, but we're not talking a lot of people.
No.
But so we're not asking, there's no teams. We don't have other team leaders that we get to do the training, but it's about the culture. And so the plan is that every year, the Red Dirt Church itself signs up to agree again for another 12 months to
Yeah.
the faith statement,
Okay.
to the sort of collaborative decision-making culture,
Yeah.
and to the child safe, to be vigilant around child safe. So
Yeah, yeah.
their
So,
commitment
so
to,
really, this is how you're approaching it in terms of giving a high degree of autonomy, but yet also having basic compliance in place as well.
yeah,
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 no,
it's
that's
something
good.
that's credible,
Yep.
but it's still simple. And again, not asking more than necessary of people who are very busy, not only earning their living some other way, but they're bearing a lot of hours into
Mm.
scaffolding a small faith community. So it's a big task. I mean, I've been uh, a chaplain for professional rugby league for both North Queensland Cowboys and the Brisbane Broncos. But I've also done 2 stints in semi-pro, which is people who are actually earning their living and then coming to training afterwards. And I actually think that, Red Dirt Church leaders are definitely in that semi-pro um, zone. And I would argue from 14 years of doing it that it's the harder calling to be semi-pro.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight.
Mm.
One last question. If someone was looking at setting up pop-up churches or doing what you've done as a network of pop-up churches, do you have one key piece of advice to them?
Well, for me, I had to unlearn, and this may not be applicable to everyone who asks that question, but I had to unlearn the Sunday oriented view of what it means to be Jesus Church.
Yeah,
So my wife and I, Ellie, we were actually quite successful at the big church thing. I could do the platform stuff and create teams and all that sort of stuff. But we realized that when we shifted to this simple church idea, that it really was an everyday kind of church, and that if people didn't happen to show up at our Thursday night gathering, which is the regular rhythm for us, that that cup of coffee, that phone call, helping someone move, which I just did on the weekend,
yeah,
that is all being the church, and that the event is not nearly as important as the relationship over
relationship.
a week and over a long period of time. And so I guess as a senior pastor of a large church, you can be a bit picky about who you do life with. But in simple church, we're all in together,
Yeah.
and we had to learn, get away from that event oriented mindset and embrace an all of life faith community sort of journey.
Oh, that's fantastic. Warren, I'm sure that as time goes by, we'll be talking again and listening to more of your insights and wisdom and learnings as you're on the road, literally around this nation. But thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you and what you've had to share. So thank you.
Well, God bless you, brother, and exponential onward.